So let's talk about market segmentation. And really, let's talk about what we're talking about when we talk about what we're talking about when we talk about market segmentation. You've probably heard the phrase product market fit. If you haven't, you should, and now you have. So for product market fit, that market we're talking about is a market segment, right? If you think of everybody everywhere that might possibly buy something as the like general marketplace, then you need to find a segment of it that will fit your product and make a product that will fit that segment, right? So both of those are dynamic. Both of those can shift a bit as you're developing your product and you figure out what need sets there are out there, right? What are these unmet or underserved needs that, potential customers have and how you might address them. This is an iterative process. Product development is an iterative effort. So a product can't be all things to all people, right? Right. So what part of the marketplace, what market segment are you going to address and how might you identify that? Well, in that, product market fit thing, we're going to, talk about the market segmentation at this point. How do you do the segmentation? What is it? Can we get a little bit more analytical on it and not just be like randomly doing stuff and pretending we know what we're doing? Like, let's talk about some tools and see what we can do about this. So what is a segment? It's a collection of people that have the same needs, or at least similar enough needs, that it'll work for you to cluster them together to be able to, create a product for them, right? So, there isn't a specific set of defined segments out there and you just have to, run the demographics or whatever else enough to be able to divide them into sets. No, like a segment is just a group of folks that you can address their needs. For whom you can address their needs. So really you want to be able to find that segment and do that segmentation, right? It's an artificial divide that you're going to be creating. It's not some predefined thing. So an example is if you are going to address the keyboard market and you want to find segments like playing music keyboard, not like typing keyboard. I'm happy I did this because that really helped you out. Define what I was talking about with the keyboards there. But I'm talking about like electric piano versus synthesizer versus like the kids starting keyboard thing. Now, I just listed 3 solutions, 3 products, but that's not actually the place you in best practice and sort of theory would start. We want to figure out what the needs are. Those are 3 different products that address 3 different market segments, or at least would the companies that produce those products have defined segments such that those are the products in which they're going to service the needs of those customers. Now, how you actually define it, how you break up the segments and define them is a bit tough. It's an iterative process, just like developing the product is an iterative process. Segmentation needs some amount of whether you voice of customer collection or whatever you want to. That phrase is a little bit out of vogue now, I guess. I don't know, whatever. You have to be able to collect information from the marketplace to be able to do segmentation, but you also have to do a little bit of segmentation to be able to ensure that you're collecting information from the right areas of the market, right? So there's a little bit of a chicken or egg thing here where you have to like rough out some segmentation to go collect some information to then be able to do some segmentation. Make sense? No? Good. So that's what you need to be able to do. Now, where might you start? Well, a lot of times folks start in the wrong place and they'll do some research on segmentation and they'll hear about geographic or demographic or behavioral or psychographic. So these categories are not segments, right? And segments is just a group of folks whose needs are similar enough that you can address with a product. Those categories, demographic, geographic, behavioral, and psychographic, are descriptive buckets such that you can sort of use that as a model, as a shorthand for your group of folks. Right? Now, behavioral and psychographic can start to lead into, because then you're actually getting into, those sort of start to overlap with what their actual needs are. But even there, be wary, and certainly geographic and definitely demographic. Don't be like, oh, well, these people can't buy this product because they're of this age group. Well, unless we're talking about, adult content, but let's put that aside for right now. Yeah, I mean, there's other, regulations and, ethics and stuff about sort of age, for instance. But putting that aside, you really don't want to cut off what might be a good part of your segment just because they're not what you envision to be the age bracket that would be used in your product, right? Like, why would you cut off part of your marketplace? No, like a segment is a group of needs, right? Or a group of people with the same needs. That's how you want to segment. All right, cool. So we know we're going to be segmenting by the needs. We might use those things later to categorize and allow us to sort of understand sort of as a shorthand where we might want to do some tactical marketing, whatever, but that's sort of a side thing, right? For a segment to be usable, it needs to be large enough, right? You have to have like an actual business plan that makes sense. It's got to be able to be profitable. You need to do some amount of measurability to it, right? Like you have to be able to measure that segment. Like what are the attributes of that segment, et cetera, because otherwise you're not going to be able to develop a product for them. They have to be accessible. Makes sense. You have to be able to actually reach them with your product. They need to be responsive. So they need to be able to effectively buy your product as you do strategic and or tactical marketing with them. And you want them to be stable. Now you can address like the Halloween costume market. That's like so cyclical that it's not quite stable, or maybe it is if you have that long-term plan. But you could go chasing fads, but that's not really segmentation. And that's just shooting from the hip stuff. Like, let's not chase fads. Let's actually address consistent markets. So when you're segmenting, when you start out a product, you have that chicken or egg issue. What are you going to do? What direction do you go? You're like, I'm at the beginning. My boss or somebody told me, some VP or C something O told me that I have to do some segmentation. Where do I start? Well, because you have the chicken or egg thing, don't just hop into the field and like try to start surveying people. Like, no. When you're starting off very early in the project, see what you've got for historical data. See what the team has for experience, right? Some of them, there's a really good chance they've been in this market before. Do secondary research or find secondary research, right? Primary being you going out and talking to people. Secondary being you find reports or other information of people going out and talking to customers. So that might be industry reports or trade magazines. They might be there, which those two places might have other sort of analytics that aren't even necessarily primary research. But grab whatever information you have. By the way, complaint data is an often untapped, awesome resource for marketplace information. It's basically, hey, we've got a problem, right? That's what a complaint database is a bunch of people that have got a problem. Yeah, it might be a problem with some of your products or other products or whatever, but, still, like, it's a problem. And so see if you can solve that. Putting aside sort of the technical solutions, technical support stuff, if there's some sort of underlying need, like, dig at that. By the way, it used to be you couldn't look at other people's complaints. Nowadays, you can just go to whatever online marketplace there is and read the reviews, right? Spend plenty of time there. So that's a great resource. Grabbing all of that together, you can rough out some market segments, right? And you can use a segment table, market segment table, near the project start, using historical data team expertise, secondary research, etc., and online research, and lay out that table. Then you've got a rough framing of where to go. Once you've broken up into buckets, these rough buckets early on, before you've actually gone out into the field and gotten any primary research done, you now have a mapping. right? Your segmentation table is a good mapping initial. It's a model of the marketplace, but it's not perfect. But it's your first step. You can then use that understanding to then figure out where you need to go collect more information, right? Where do you need to go send a survey? Where do you need to go do some customer interviews, et cetera? Now, whether you go to the qualitative information like ethnography or user interviews, et cetera, or whether you go into the more quantitative like surveys, is a bit of a strategic decision on what you've got going on. There's no sort of one size fits all there. You do need to have information to be going for. So if you don't have enough understanding of the marketplace to go figure out what to be asking, say in your surveys, then you're going to need to do some qualitative stuff, right? Figure out what those sort of individual needs are. This is more likely the case. You likely don't have this information, but I just didn't want to say, there's a one size fits all thing here. So you go out, you get some qualitative information about, what their needs are. Then you do some quantitative information gathering about, what sort of ranges that they might want, right? So, you might, for the keyboard, they might need to have some amount of volume, for instance, that comes out of the thing. All users are going to need some amount of volume, but there might be some users that need a lot more volume and other users that might need much less. There might be a profile of different, synthesized sounds, right? It might sound like a concert piano, or it might sound like violins or whatever, right? You might need a drum kit on it for some segments and not for others. So, the variety, the volume, all these sort of attributes of what the user needs are things that you're going to need to be able to define segment by segment. And you need to figure out what those needs are first, qualitatively. Then you can go quantitatively and find out sort of what levels are out there. Once you've done that, you can then break it up, more specifically by segment, much more analytically. Warning on surveys, probably in all of product development, the largest gap between how easy a lot of people think it is and how easy it actually is. Surveys are super crazy hard to do right, and a lot of people just jump into them. So careful there. Certainly seems like a topic for another video or series of videos, because again, not an easy thing to do well. The actual analytical step, once you start getting the quantitative information back from surveys or however else you're getting it done, there's a few different ways to do this. Amongst the most common are doing like a straight up statistical test, like an ANOVA or a t-test. You might not know how to do that, but that's okay. There are spreadsheet products out there that can do the more simple tests. You might need to get a statistical package to do the more complicated, but it's not out of the realm of possibility for you, right? This is something that you can do. You might need to do some learning there, but it is something that you can do. Basically, though, what these things do, ANOVA and t-test, is differentiate the mean, what's called the mean response, from groups, right? So say you've got two different groups that you think might be two different segments, but you're not sure. And you can say, okay, this group, they want, volume at this level, and this group, they want volume at this level. But they're not all identical, right? So, whatever decibels you're measuring, for instance, this group might, have an average of 75, and this group might have an average of 65, but there's a lot of variation in amongst those groups. And so, are those averages different because there's actually a difference, or just the way you randomly selected it? Randomly selected your users. And that's what the statistical analysis is going to tell you, is like, okay, this group is actually greater and by this amount than this group, with some amount of confidence. So that's a straight up statistical test. And that's going to allow you to break up into groups. To really take it to the next level, you can do a thing called cluster analysis. So what cluster analysis allows you to do is, a lot of things. In this particular case, for market segmentation, you get a bunch of folks, you get what their actual needs are, right? Like, so they need it, volume at this level, they need this many different sounds to come out of this thing, they need this size of keys, they need this many octaves, whatever, all these sort of different things that the user is going to want out of their keyboard. And you cluster them together. You generally need a good statistical software package to do this. You could sort of do it by hand. It might take a little while, but the thing that comes out of it often, the diagram that comes out of it is a dendrogram, and it traces how these groups, how does sort of your data, the folks that you talk to, how they relate to one another. And you could say, hey, every time, they want, sound clarity of this, it seems to always be with people that want the full size keys, right? And after a while, you might develop sort of all these characteristics that come together and say, wow, these are people that are like professional piano players that, really want to have a good quality sound with full keys. And, they need to be able to play out at shows or whatever happens to be, where they can't, get an actual acoustic piano. That's just one path, right? And that's one segment. There's all of these sort of different paths where they may or may not overlap, and where you can define a product, or define a need set in which your product will try to address. Okay? So cluster analysis is really the real gold standard as far as figuring out across all the sort of need sets and ranges that you've got, how you can put a set of needs together. Because again, a market segment is a group of people with similar enough needs. So you need to be able to cluster those needs together where they are similar enough such that you can address. All right, so what's the next step? You've got a much more analytical approach. You've done some statistical analysis or cluster analysis, and you've identified the segments. Yay, but now which do you target? Right? That's not necessarily super clear. Some cases it'll be clear, but it's not always super clear. So where do you go from there? Well, you're going to want to prioritize by the size of the marketplace and your ability to meet the undermet or unmet customer/user needs. So you're going to want to figure that out. You might want to do some scoring of this. So, to what degree are they undermet? Right? If they're not met at all, it's basically unmet, right? But most things are met to some amount. So score how unmet they are, right? That's sort of the opportunity for you to go in and meet the needs. And as well as your ability to actually meet those needs, right? So if they're super undermet, but you don't really have an ability to meet them any better than they're currently being met, like there's not really an opportunity there for you. There is some amount of, estimation there, right? Because you're going to do some development and you don't know if you can quite hit that target. But if it's like completely wide open and you just don't have any idea, it's like complete blue sky, whether or not you can meet a need or not, you need to do some tech dev first, some technology development first to see, like, is this, plausible. And as you develop more, as your technology advances, you'll be able to figure out, can you actually do this? So in some cases, you'll just know, right? Like this is just sort of in the realm of possibilities, right? Like we could just add more sounds to a keyboard, like whatever. So you're judging how undermet they are. You're judging your ability to meet those, and then figure out, of how those compare to what these different options of segments are, what these clusters are, can you move in there? Don't go into a place that like all the needs are already being met unless you're really going on cost, but whatever, that's not really product development. That's just, I don't know what that is. You're going to want to do some analysis on this, right? You're going to want to be able to score, how big the segment is against these. So if there's like two people that that are undermet to some degree, that you can meet, like, this better be a really high-end product if you're going to make it for these two people. So, and sometimes that happens, like especially like business to business, like there's one or two businesses that have that. I mean, that can also be a little bit risky because that one or two businesses no longer comes to you. Now you've got some issues. So there's, some strategic decisions there about how stable the marketplace is, et cetera. A lot of different factors in this, but strictly from a product market fit standpoint, finding a marketplace with underserved needs enough that you can meet, and that is a large enough segment. Right? So a bubble plot is a great way to take a look at it, really help you figure out, what your best targets are. Lastly, you should note and understand the quality of your data. Like, how much uncertainty do you have about the data that you're using here? So don't just put this sort of veneer of data analysis going on, and that's sort of on like a weak foundation, and then make like really hardcore decisions on it. I mean, you suppose can do that, but just recognize, how much variability there is in your data, and recognize how confident you are in your data such that you can weigh it properly against these other strategic decisions, right? Are there other opportunities for your organization? Do you actually need to go do another round of, data collection before you move forward? If you're asking yourself that question, by the way, the answer is yes. Because there's probably 100,000 different pressures organizationally on you to get moving faster, get this thing in the marketplace, when really, if you spend the month now to go get more information, that you'll probably save yourself months and months of headache down the road. A lot of product development effort is done way too far back in the calendar, right? Getting farther into technology instead of spending the architecture time to figure out, make sure you have the right product architecture. And then before that, make sure you understand the customer and marketplace enough before you just jump into it. But that's how that goes. So hopefully this was helpful for you, for your organization, for your team, for you, so you can go out and develop great products and get that market segment fit.